Hello, the last session. You're like, hurry up, we want to go. I am very excited to be here with friends. And so I'm going to let everybody do a quick introduction of themselves, and then I'll jump into some questions. Dave, you want to start?
Yeah, Dave Mace, AWS, obviously. I work as a industry sort of specialist and advisor for media entertainment, games, and sports.
I'm David Lehanski. I'm the Executive Vice President of Business Development and Innovation at the National Hockey League.
Josh Helmrich, you guys are probably sick of me. I run player tracking at the NFL.
Yeah, and Alex, last in the round, Alex Altenhofen, Director of Product and Tech at the DFL Digital Sports, overseeing all digital products, tech stack, and working very closely with AWS.
Excellent. So we've talked a lot. I sat through the sessions today and looked at the questions I had prepared, and we've asked and answered many of those questions. So we might riff a little bit here. But we talked first about the data that we're capturing, right? And there's different methods. There's sensor, RFID tracking, there's optical tracking, there's hybrid tracking. And the amount of data that these sports are pulling in is copious. Monisha was up here earlier today talking about Formula One. They're collecting 1.1 million points of data per second off of those cars. DFL is collecting 3.6 million points of data per match, yes?
Correct.
300 million points of data per season for next-gen stats at the NFL, 1,300 points of data per second in the NHL. So lots and lots of data. We have this data, so then the question is, what do we ask of the data, and what guides that? So I'm going to go to you first, Mr. Lehanski, because I like your answer to this.
Let me start by saying the number of truly relevant and meaningful use cases has grown beyond anything we envisioned back when we started this. So without going through all of them, I'll just talk about the origin for us for, why do we start tracking the puck and the players to get all of this new data. And I think the answer should be different for each of us because all of our sports are very unique. Our fan bases look for different things in the game. For us, there was a problem that we sort of identified. It was very difficult for fringe fans, casual fans, to really develop an understanding for the game based on watching it on a screen, on their wall, or even on their hand. Why? Because there's very little downtime in hockey. There's 60 minutes of actual play. When we have a stoppage, it lasts 10, maybe 12 seconds, and you're right back at it. So the commentators and the play-by-play people don't really have time to tell stories. Your sport, right, has more downtime, and we're envious of how they use it. They're showing replays and highlights and bar charts and graphs and stats, and they're pulling you in and pulling you in. So we said, look, we've got to develop a system that gives us data, gives it to us in real time, and allows us to process it and visualize it as an overlay on the live game so people can start to understand how fast the player's moving, how fast the puck was shot, how quickly a goalie's reacting to make a save. Once we started to get into the data, of course, from that we realized, wow, the number of use cases for hockey operations, for players, for coaches, for media partners, and then on the commercialization side, we'll talk about it more, but the ability to take that and leverage it through an entirety of new experiences that never existed before is kind of blown us away.
Anybody else have a comment on this?
Yeah, you covered the most relevant part. I think it's more about storytelling, right? So storytelling for us is key because our goal is to make the Bundesliga globally successful, globally popular. And to give you an example, the Bundesliga Match Facts, one of my favorite projects, of course, which we developed together with you, with AWS. One of my favorite statistics is expected goals. So basically the probability of a shot and the probability that this goal has been scored. And you accumulate those numbers up then for every shot, for every game, for every season. And right now in the Bundesliga, there are only 3 players who scored more than 7 goals, but only have an XG value below than 4.6. So there are regular goals scored. There are no one-hit wonders, but they are highly efficient, right? So anybody guesses who these 3 players are? Anybody has any idea? So one is Grimaldo from Bayer Leverkusen. He's playing a fantastic season, right? I think he's now scored 9 goals, 10 assists. And the other 2 are players from Heidenheim, one of the smallest clubs in the Bundesliga at the moment. And one guy is Jan-Niklas Beste, and he was not popular for a lot of people in the Bundesliga or following the Bundesliga before the season, but he just got nominated for the German national team. And with the expected goals and the difference with the goal efficiency, you could really see his value increasing. You now can see his transfer market rising, and he got the nomination. And the other one is the player who's also the fastest player of the league, also another metric we are measuring together with you. His name is Erin Dingchi, so player on loan from Werder Bremen, playing for Heidenheim now. He has scored 8 goals, I think, and his expected goal value is only 2.9, so he's super efficient. And of course, we all know Harry Kane scored 31 goals. It's an honor to have him in the league, and it's great for us. But looking deeper in the data, and using then those insights to create new editorial ideas for our own channels, to create broadcast and shoulder-playing content for our broadcasting partners. This is really us then leveraging this new data and telling new stories.
Awesome. Dave, you've had experience working with a bunch of different customers in this space, even track cycling. And that was from the inception, gathering the data all the way through a player app and delivering those insights. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's all about stories and stuff. When you're digging into certain sports, I mean, we went into track cycling indoor on a velodrome, and it's a fixed track. I didn't have a clue about it. So as a new fan to this, I was like, well, why is it important for them to be in a pack and things like that? Why does it make a difference? And they were using, obviously, the streamline to do it, but how do you show that and tell that story to someone of why that's happening? So we had to say, right, well, let's collect some data. So we put tracking on the actual cyclists, tracking on the bike, and then we could measure the speed of 2 cyclists. So one's here, they're going the exact same speed, but then we'd put sensors in the pedals, and they'd have different power. So you can see that this rider is basically just getting a tow, like you do in Formula 1, they're just tagging along, and then they drift around it, but we had to tell that story, so we had to surface the data to tell that story, to get that insight, and it all needs context for the data. And another example of why sometimes data doesn't quite work is we were going to watch a rugby game, proper rugby with a ball game, and we were late to get there, so we couldn't see it on TV. So we're looking at the website and saying, who's winning. I think it was Hull KR, and Hull, on every single stat, the meters, the scrums, they were absolutely killing it. They were destroying the other team, yet they were losing. So you're sitting there going, what is going on? But there was no story to tell because we were just looking at static feeds of data. So we had to look at the TV and hear the commentator, and the commentator would tell a story. And it was just a couple of lucky tries, how it had done it. But without that deeper insight of that data, it's not useful, really. You can't just feed it. You need to give context to it and stuff.
I think
so
one point to add to that is or expand upon what you just said, is how critical it is to have a partner that's willing to collaborate with you, right? Because you guys are technology experts. We're hockey experts. We need use cases that make sense for how we're going to use the data. The analogy I just gave, we've got these short little windows, right? So we developed something called face-off probability to give you a quick estimation of who's likely to win the face-off, right? That might not have been something from afar we would have said, let's start with face-offs, right? Yeah. But once you get in and you talk to broadcasters and you talk to coaches and you really start to understand the complexity of the sport and you have a partner who gets that and builds for that, that's when you get use cases that matter and fans sort of say, wow, this is additive, it's better.
It's great getting actual athletes. So a lot of the times when we sit with customers, we try and work back and say, look, what are you trying to solve or what are you trying to highlight? So we say, can we chat to a commentator or can we chat to one of the athletes? And we'll say, look, break this down for me. Explain to me what has gone on in that exact sort of moment, that play, that ride, that overtake, whatever it is, whatever sport. And then we say, right, how are we now going to tell that to a fan? What do I need to collect to insight to tell what you've just said to me to a Joe Blogs fan who doesn't necessarily get it in detail? But
I think sometimes we have examples too of the data teaching us something that we didn't expect, right? And you talk about some of these things. I think the NFL, you've even changed rules based on some of the data,
yeah,
right?
I mean, we got more data from player tracking in our first game of player tracking than the history of the NFL's data combined. And so we're not data mining experts. We don't have engineering resources in-house. And so having somebody like AWS for us allowed us to find the stories. For us, it was, yes, partly media-driven, but really when we presented our business plan to ownership to get funding, it was we need to benefit the entire ecosystem. And so how do you find which data is relevant to which party, right? The coaches may care about something different than the broadcast partners, who cares different than the competition committee who's looking at it for rule changes. So to your question, yes, I mean, we've used data, and it was one of the things we pitched to the commissioner because we went and visited Australia where Catapult was doing some tracking, and they made decisions based on data. Hey, we want to speed the game up or slow the game down. Well, instead of coaches watching film and subjectively saying, yeah, the game looks slower or faster, they had data. And I think that was a compelling reason alone to say, hey, if we're going to make rule changes, we want data to help tell that story. And we're able to get data through our partner Zebra, but how do we make sense of it and find the relevant stories? And that's where I think AWS has been tremendously helpful for us in finding what those stories are for all of the different parties that matter.
You know, I always say there's the science to this data, right? We're mining this data. There's a lot of, intense AI, machine learning, CV, but the art to the application of the art to the data, the art of the storytelling is the most important part. And I think both of you alluded to some interesting executions you had leveraging data with Disney, right, to have different executions to appeal to different audiences. But are there other examples of sort of and it could even be working with broadcast partners and whatnot, because it's if people can't understand it, if the data is too heady or too complex, then we are doing it wrong. The whole point is to bring people into the sport, into the game, help them understand it and love it more. So are there more examples that you have of that storytelling where you've had, just an aha moment, whether it's with talent or with a new analytic or feedback from fans or anything to that effect?
I think what we have been doing is personalizing the fan experience, right? Because the data I have just explained before might not be relevant for everyone, right? Some of them just want to enjoy the game, some of them want to dig deeper, some of them want to present or want to see data in a different way. And we have done cases with our interactive feed, for example, which we offer now to 3 broadcasters, where every fan can just select with overlays, right? Like which data they want to see and which additional enhancement they want to have to the games. I mean, you guys have done similar stuff, and I think this is I think a new age of streaming devices, which enables us to not have one linear signal, but to really personalize the fan experience for everyone. Because every fan is different.
Yeah.
Every fan is unique. I mean, we see it in our data. We collect millions of interaction data, millions of fan profile data, and we build those segments, and we know that every fan needs to be addressed in the right way, with the right content at the right time. Yeah.
I found that, data and analytics can be scary to people who don't know, especially football coaches and traditionalists, and getting them to understand what the potential is. We've had a couple of those aha moments, and I think that's when you really unlock the potential. So one example, a story I always tell, although we are football and hockey experts, I'm not a football expert in the way that a professional player or coach is. And so we often look to them for, hey, how do you look at a game? Forget the numbers and the data. What do you look for? And let us try to figure out if there's data that we can help tell that story. So one example is Kurt Warner, who's a Hall of Fame quarterback who played, I think, for the Rhein Fire in this stadium. Kurt was like, hey, when I retired, completion percentage, which means if I throw the ball 10 times and I complete 8 of them, 80% completion percentage, very accurate passer. In today's NFL, where there's all these short passes, that metric doesn't really mean anything to me. Can you, in your data, tell me how slow a receiver has to slow down or speed up based on where I throw the ball? And we're like, yes, we can. We don't have that stat today, but that's when we turn to AWS and say, hey, we know this is potentially possible in the data. And getting stories like that from like Kurt, where you get it. We see that you get it. That's really where we see. And same thing, we talk to football players, current players. They come through our office and say, yeah, I know analytics. Go for it more on 4th down. And we're like, yeah, but that's not. If you're looking only, that is part of it. But if you look there, that game management is not the only potential. And that's where, as you mentioned, distilling it down into simple, digestible things. For the broadcast, it's as simple as putting a halo under a rusher to say this guy's likely going to blitz. That's not a stat. And there's a lot that goes behind that with generative AI and the player tracking and all the compute power that AWS puts behind it. But all it manifests itself as a red circle under the player. But it really changes the way people watch the broadcast. So I think finding more of those simple stats and understanding what is the data's potential is where the future is and where the aha moment will come.
Do you know what I loved on the NFL? As a Brit.
You're British?
Yep. Yeah, Leeds fan. I grew up on proper football. So I haven't got a clue what's going on in American football. But when you brought out, it was the return yardage. We were just chatting about it up there, a kick to return it. And it broke down the stat of, here's the players, here's the direction they're going, and what's the percent of returning that many yards. But I didn't get why that was important or what it was. And then when it came out, it was 0.3% chance of doing it.
Yep.
You're like, okay, it's a rare moment.
Yeah.
So you become invested in going, I want this to happen. And I absolutely loved it when that stat came out, because it taught me something of the sport which I had zero clue on. But now if I watch it, I'm like, come on, return it.
No,
it's never going to happen.
Yeah.
But I'm like, I'm in there. And that's the engagement piece of just telling that little simple stat.
100%. And you are the demo we talk about when we play games abroad. And we're like, how do we make this game accessible for fans like you? We're like, I don't really know what's happening. Why was that a good play? Well, there was a 2% chance that actually was going to happen, and it happened.
That's when it's a rarity insight of a story. And that's why it's
context.
That's
that's what the data is really good for, especially on the media side. Different applications for health and safety and for our coaches, but for media and fans, I think contextualizing our game for people who don't understand it is really, really part of the benefit and where the potential still lies to do a lot more.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes the criticism is, data's overtaking the soul of sport, right? And you do have a bunch of nerds, what about the people who know things in their gut to be true? And we've talked about this a little bit. How do you take and translate that gut into something that could be supported by data? My thought is these things coexist and they complement each other. And I don't think that you can have, a totally data-driven focus agnostic of any other, because there's so many other dynamics in sport, right? There's the chemistry, that is the philosophy, and whether or not you fit into a particular program. What is your response to that tension? And do you still see that tension, or is it starting to sort of lessen and people realize there's a coexistence here?
It's starting to lessen, but you talked about the art and the science. I think we often get pushback from coaches or players, like I mentioned, go for it more on fourth down. The traditionalist, the old school football coach would tell you, well, those numbers don't know that my player just rolled his ankle on the last play, or we're really tired. That's not relevant. And the smart progressive ones are like, I know that I'm not going to make a decision based on that metric alone, but my job is to be as informed and educated as possible. And it's the science part is the numbers, and the art is which ones matter and how much do I weigh them. And so I want to know what the computer says on should I go for it or not. And then I take into consideration weather and injuries and momentum and all the other subjective things. But I think what we've seen is the more data you have, the better the models become and the better the output. And so I don't think you'll ever get to a point where coach is completely obsolete and just goes on the numbers. But I think the better data sets, the more processing, the more stats, the more informed they become. And so we've seen a lot more of that as they rely on data to be educated as they make a decision versus old school guys that were pure gut. Now there's gut and numbers, and I'm combining them, and that's how you really make progress.
Yeah, so there was resistance from everyone. Coaches, players, media partners. It's a human experiment. People don't like change when you force change or try to implement change. And so I think there are three factors that we've kind of sort of seen arise in how we implement or sort of work through the resistance. The first is letting them know that it's additive, right? This is a tool for you to use. You can use it if you want to. You don't have to if you really love doing it the way you're doing it. That's one. Two is you need to somehow make it relevant to them, right? And this goes back to the understanding, having a good partner. So like a media partner, a coach, a player, a league for commercialization purposes. We all have a different thought in our head for how we're going to use it. To a coach, you need to explain like why this might be beneficial. Same for a player and everyone else. And then the last one to some degree is that there's no right and wrong in this, and so ultimately it's an iterative process, and so there's no mistakes to be made, right? This is sort of something that you'll learn from and you'll grow over time. So we'll do this together. It's a collaborative process, and you kind of move forward. And that starts to break it down. I'd say the one other thing for me that it's clear. We all understand this. We all have it up here, and we can kind of see and have a vision for where it's going. Not everyone does. And so visualizing anything, right? This is a prototype for a tool. This is how we can visualize our game data in a three-dimensional environment. Putting that in front of somebody, it's a huge leap forward in the curve for convincing someone why there's value in this. So we try to do that in every case.
And I think it's interesting too, because there's also a repetitiveness. Like the more you do this, the more it becomes part of just the vernacular of sport, right? Where it used to be a little off-putting, and these are, a more of an engineering approach to a game. It just becomes part of what people talk about now, right? And so when you have, and you touched on this, Alex, streaming platforms that allow people, before we sort of had a linear one-to-many pipe, and now streaming platforms, people can choose their own adventure, so to speak. And so you look at something like Prime Vision on Thursday Night Football on Prime Video from Amazon.
Where is it?
And
you can buy it for
and that is a completely statistical overlay view of the game. And so people who really want to lean in and understand that can do that. Those that don't have to. But you've also talked before, Josh, about taking some of what's working on those intensive platforms and being the things that you poured over, much like the new yellow line, as you talked about earlier.
Yeah, I mean, and that is what's great about the streaming partners and being able to find a testing ground, because it started out very analytically inclined with tons of stats, and we had an LRAP with data. And then we said, how do we make it more visual? Even though it's for a statistically forward audience, not everyone wants to be inundated with numbers, even amongst that audience. And so it became identifying who's likely to blitz, which wide receivers are open, where should the quarterback be looking, and then the casual fan or the more avid fan can say, why did he miss that open receiver? Like, I'm understanding more as a fan. Some of those resonated so well that they did take those to the main broadcast. And so the main broadcast, for those who don't know in the NFL, aren't familiar with NFL broadcasts, we hear from broadcast partners all the time, hey, I want to address Joe's six-pack, the average American at home who doesn't know stats, doesn't know data, so I don't want to overwhelm him. And so I don't need yards above expected all the time and all these complex numbers, but hey, I can get behind a red circle that helps me identify, you should have seen that guy, he was going to rush. The computer knew. Why didn't that quarterback have the same thought process? And the alternate broadcast has been a great testing opportunity, and we want to find more of those. The yellow line, the red circle, the green circle. I don't know if it's color-based, but what's the next thing to figure out how to help explain the game at home?
It's nice to have them choices, though. You get the tactical feed. Like, the tactical feed, for me, is brilliant. I love it. But some people just want an old-school plain broadcast, or it is. But some people, you bring in the X-ray vision, you put it on, and having that personalized feed, but just giving it to your customer or your fan and saying, look, it's your choice. You want to go all in on the stats? We've got you. You want to go just a standard plain broadcast? We've got you again. But give them that choice to have
And
it
I
there
think in
or
the
not.
future you'll see even more customization. Can I have a hybrid between the two?
Yeah.
Can I just turn on the halos and the trails and not the big stats? Or turn on interactivity? I think in the future you'll have even more flexibility to reach the fans exactly the experience that they want to have.
Well, they get to produce their own broadcast at the end of the day, right?
Right.
Which would be awesome. I'm going to leave it there. Thank you all. Thank you all. Wonderful sports innovation. Thank you to Sport Tech and the DFL, and this was exceptional. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.